Today I'm going to talk about some things that I'd have liked to have done differently if I had a little bit of hindsight when I first started out as a lucid dreaming beginner. So if you're a beginner listening to this, stay tuned because these are some of the things that might help you have a better experience than I did when I first started out. Before we begin, I want to give a disclaimer. There might be some pops and clicks in this audio. I'm using the noise cancelling because one of my neighbour's dogs is yapping away outside, and I figure the odd pop or click is probably better than constant barking in the background. Also, if this is your first time watching one of my videos or you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and enable all of those notifications because I've got hundreds of videos on lucid dreaming on this channel and I'm posting more all of the time, so that way you can stay up to date when I post new guides, tips, tricks, stories of my experiences, and a whole lot more. Now, without further ado, let's get on to some of those things that I'd have done a little bit differently. So the first thing would be that I would have tried not to be so afraid to fail lucid dreaming techniques, but at the same time not expect to do so. See, when I was a beginner, I was very afraid that I was going to do a technique wrong and not get any results with it. And then I also sort of built up this expectation that a lot of the techniques just wouldn't work for me. And I see a lot of people doing this. It is perfectly okay to fail techniques. Sometimes it's going to happen. Sometimes you're going to find certain techniques might not be the best for you. And sometimes you're going to do them wrong because you're a beginner and you're not entirely sure what you're doing. Or because you haven't had any lucid dreams yet under your belt, you might just find that certain techniques don't start being very effective until you've had a bit of experience lucid dreaming. That's okay. Try not to stress yourself out too much over any early failures that you have. And try not to stress yourself out if it takes you a bit longer than someone else to lucid dream. But at the same time, don't set this expectation in your head. Don't tell yourself this is going to be a months and months long process. Tell yourself that you're going to lucid dream very quickly. You're going to find a technique that works for you and it's going to work very well. Because for most people, that is the truth. Most people are going to find a simple technique that works well for them. Whether it be mild, whether it be repeating a mantra, whether it be the intention technique, whether it be nap chaining, there's a whole lot of things that a beginner can easily do to get lucid. Now, the second thing that I'd have done differently is I'd have been a lot more consistent with my dream journal. I would dream journal here and there in little bursts, and I wouldn't bother dream journaling on nights when I didn't remember any of my dreams or when the dreams were uninteresting. And this meant that my dream recall took a while to get to a really good place. And occasionally it would get to a really good place, but because I was inconsistent with my dream journal, it would then go back to being not so great. But the reason that I would have done this differently going back is not actually anything to do with dream recall. It's because, knowing a little bit better now, I would have used that dream journal as a tool to get lucid more often. This is especially useful when you're a beginner and you're not getting lucid as often as you like. You should be looking through your dream journal, finding dream signs, and using those as an extra way to get lucid. Now, I didn't really start doing this until much later in my lucid dreaming experience, so this is something that I would go back and do differently as a beginner. Keep a consistent dream journal and regularly be looking for dream signs in it. The next thing that I would do differently is I would have a better ratio of learning to practice. And this is something that I think most of us are guilty of in multiple areas in our lives. We'll get into a hobby and we will research. We'll watch every video, we'll pick up 6 books on the subject and read through them, or we'll read a million guides and articles, but we won't do a whole lot of practice. And it's practice where you actually learn those things. You're just absorbing information when you're watching, one of my guides or whatever, but it's when you put those guides into practice, when you actually put those techniques into practice and then get lucid dreams with them or find what works or doesn't work for you, that's when you are learning that skill. If you're struggling to maintain this balance between research and practice, then what I suggest you do is just couple your research with some practice. So for example, every time you watch one of my videos or any lucid dreaming video, make sure you do a reality check. Maybe you picked up my book, the Lucid Dream Book, link in the top right hand corner if you're interested in learning more about that, and you are reading it every night. Well, when you get done reading for the night, perhaps actually pick up your dream journal and read through the recent entries for that and look for some dream signs. And try to think about how you can use those to get lucid tonight. And most importantly, try to be practicing some kind of techniques regularly. Not everyone can be, waking themselves up with alarms for certain techniques all of the time, but there's lots of techniques that you can do that don't involve that. There's the intention technique where you simply set the intention to get lucid before you go to bed. There's things like reality checks, and of course, if you find yourself waking up naturally in your sleep anyway, you can always perform something like DEILD, or just perform any of the other techniques you usually would, like a mantra. Yes, learning more, researching more is better, but to really implement those lessons, to really develop those skills, you need to be putting the things that you're learning into practice as well. So make sure that you keep that balance. Now, on the subject of actually researching and learning these different techniques, I suggest watching multiple guides for the same techniques. And yes, that means I'm suggesting that you don't just watch exclusively my channel, but you watch some other lucid dreaming channels as well. And similarly, when you watch a guide on someone else's channel, come and check out my video on it as well. Lucid dreaming is not like a lot of hobbies where you can show people exactly what you're doing, because a lot of it is happening in your head and it's a subjective experience. So when I make a guide on how to perform a particular subjective technique, I am coming from my own subjective experience. So I'm going to come at it in a certain way that works really well for me. And for a lot of you guys, that's going to work really well for you as well. But you might find that someone else's guide resonates with you better. Or similarly, you watch another guide and you think, I can't do this technique. This doesn't seem very good. This seems too complicated. And then you watch my guide and you think, oh, actually, that makes a whole lot of sense. By watching or reading at least 2 or 3 guides on a particular technique, you'll find that you sort of fill in the gaps and you find the things that you need to know to actually be successful with that technique. Sometimes you'll find that you only need to watch one or read one, and that's fine, and you do it perfectly the first time. But especially if you're struggling, broaden your horizons and get information from a few different places at once. Now, as a related piece of advice, I also suggest going back to guides. And you can do this even if you're not a beginner. Go back to guides that you've read or watched before, because you're going to find that human memory isn't perfect. And you'll go back to a guide for a technique that you feel super familiar with, and you'll notice that there's a whole step that you missed, or a step that you're performing slightly wrong. And you'll make that adjustment and suddenly find that it works a lot better. It's always good to refresh your knowledge from time to time. And especially when you're a beginner just starting out, because you might not retain all of that information about every step in the guide right away. A good rule of thumb here as a beginner is to re-watch at least one guide on the technique that you're going to perform each night that you're going to perform it until you've actually had some success with that technique. The next thing that I'd have done differently is I'd have tried to have already had an idea of what I wanted to do in a given lucid dream before I got lucid. The reason for this is we talk a lot about how excitement is one of the easiest ways to wake up as a beginner and cut the dream short. But excitement isn't just about, oh wow, I'm lucid now. A lot of the time the excitement is, oh wow, I'm lucid now. There's so many things I could do. I don't even know where I want to start. And it's just that feeling of being overwhelmed with so many options that can just jolt you awake and end the dream. When you have a clear idea in your mind of what exactly it is that you want to do, that's less likely to happen. You're going to find, you have a plan, step A, step B, step C, and you can execute that plan rather than standing there awestruck just with 1,000,001 options not knowing which to pick. So you're going to cut down your chances of waking up early, and you're also going to not waste a whole bunch of time trying to decide what to do. Especially since when you're in a dream, sometimes the way that you think isn't quite as clear-headed as when you're awake. So you might find a harder time actually deciding on what to do, or you might find that you decide on something and you wake up and you're like, why did I do that? That wasn't even that fun. That wasn't even a great idea. I would have come up with this much better idea if I was awake when I'd made that decision. And this is especially true if you're having a lucid dream where the clarity isn't quite all there, which is something that you're probably going to experience at least from time to time when you're a beginner. Last but not least, one thing that I really wish I'd done as a beginner is learned WILD or DEILD much earlier. I sort of put these techniques off. I gave them an early attempt, but I didn't have much luck, and I sort of just put them off and assumed, okay, these are way too complicated for a beginner. I'm just going to stick to the basics. And while it's true that I don't generally recommend WILD or DEILD as someone's first technique, because I feel like you're likely to get demotivated if you don't have any success because you do mess it up, and there are much easier techniques that are harder to screw up that you can start with, I do still think that it's something that you should learn fairly early on. DEILD especially is really quite easy to learn. All you have to do is the next time that you find yourself waking up from a dream, just close your eyes, put your focus back on that dream and keep imagining it as you're falling back asleep. And usually that's all you need to do to get back into that dream, usually with lucidity. But the reason these are so good to learn early on is these are probably the techniques that have the highest % success rate once you know how to do them. If you are in REM and you know how to perform DEILD or wild, and there isn't something preventing you from falling back asleep, then you can almost guarantee that you are going to get into a lucid dream right now. I can't think of any other technique that is quite that consistent. Anyway, these are just a few things that I would do differently if I could go back and be a beginner all over again. What about some of you guys that are watching that aren't beginners? What would you change about your early days lucid dreaming? What would you have done differently? I'd love to know down below. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure you subscribe and enable all notifications so you can stay up to date when my new videos come out. And if you want to keep watching right now, check out one of those videos on screen, go watch that, and I'll see you there soon. Take care.